Good morning. I'm Shane, and I'm a postbac student here at the National Institute of Health, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to On Being Human, Reflections of Transgender Health and Wellness. The kickoff event to NIH's Pride Month's 2014 observance. This event is but one of many that will be going on throughout this month in support of LGBTI's programs portfolio year-long theme, Breaking Through the Trans Ceiling, a community's response to transgender health and well-being. Over the next 90 minutes, the panelists will share their stories and reflect their perspectives on what transgender health and well-being means to them. There is power in storytelling. There is power in words. And I thank you all for joining us today, both in person and via webcast, and for empowering us to share our stories with you. So this thing says I should talk about myself, so I'm going to say something about myself. I'm a recent graduate of Brandeis University. I identify as a transgender male, and I'm a Jamaican native and an aspiring MD PhD student. A little bit about my experience here at the NIH. I started my transition here, and originally I wasn't going to go about it, but I met some really, really wonderful people in the OIT office, Dr. Sharon Milgram, and my lab members who are extremely supportive from Dr. Barry Kaplan's lab, and the scientific director's office out of the National Institute of Mental Health. And I must say that they've definitely empowered me with the resources, with mentors like Scout, to pursue my dream, as a transgender male and a scientist. It's also important for me to say that when I originally heard about this event from Albert, he showed up at one of our meetings, LGBTQI Fellows and Friends. I'm a mentor of that program, and I was really, really excited to be a part of this. And I realized I was excited out of fear, as opposed to just excitement, to be a part of something that is progressive. But I was excited out of fear that if I didn't participate as a scientist and became visible for other young scientists like myself, then I'll be perpetuating a system in which people like me will always think that we're the first. So every time we decide to pursue a goal in life, whether it's being a scientist, whether it's being a doctor, a poet, whatever it is, we'll always think that we're alone. But I wanted to make sure that young people like me and other scientists in upcoming will always have someone to look to say, oh, there's someone who's a scientist and we can do it, even though you're transgender. So I think that's enough about myself. So while today's panel seeks to share their reflections, and there's more to it than that, and I want to share a few statistics with you about trans people according to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. 1 out of 5 members of the trans community are homeless for a portion of their lives. 57% experience rejection from family members. 30% have physical disability or mental health condition. Trans people represent 4 times the national average of HIV infections. Trans men and women have doubled the rate of unemployment of the general population. 50% report experiences of workplace discrimination, and 41% have attempted suicide. So throughout today's conversation, as well as this month's upcoming events, including transgender sensitivity training on June 18th, and the Brown Bag Conversation with Amanda Simpson on June 26th, and the subsequent series of seminars, trainings, and brown bag lunches and discussion that will continue throughout the year, our hope is that we can increase your knowledge of the trans experience in health research, health services, and employment. These statistics are disheartening, but I'm encouraged by the efforts of the NIH is making to educate our workforce on how trans individuals navigate their lives. This is a critical step in fostering a workplace and research culture that is trans affirming and trans inclusive. I applaud these efforts, and I applaud each and every one of you for your commitment to being here and helping transform the NIH. It is now my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Rashada Alexander, Special Assistant to Dr. Larry Tabak, who brings remarks on behalf of the immediate office of the Director and the LGBTI Research Coordinating Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shane. First of all, I would like to apologize for being tardy. That's really all I got to say. You can clown me about it afterwards, but I was totally tardy. So good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be here this morning. As Shane mentioned, my name is Rashada Alexander, and I have the pleasure of serving in dual roles here at NIH. One of those roles is as the NIH point person on a lot of LGBTI-related issues, and the second is as the Special Assistant to the Principal Deputy Director, Dr. Lawrence Tabak, who is back there. Please stand, Larry. That's totally my boss. And in the space as Larry's special assistant, as well as the NIH point person on a lot of these issues, I want to, and as part of the immediate office of the director, I want to welcome you all and thank you so much for being here this morning. As I mentioned, I'm the representative on the NIH LGBTI Research Coordinating Committee, which is also known as the RCC, because we in the government love acronyms. It's a trans NIH coordinating committee that was established officially last January as a standing NIH committee to collaborate and coordinate research activities that are related to the health research for sexual and gender minority populations throughout NIH, as well as in conjunction with a lot of our federal partners across the government, but specifically within the Department of Health and Human Services. Since our establishment, the RCC, which is co-chaired by the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development, NICHD, and the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities, NIMHD, it has and continues to work on communicating with sexual and gender minority communities to better understand what are the health research priorities, what are the things that we need to be thinking about, and how do we effectively engage with folks as we move forward in our efforts. This has included hosting listening sessions on a variety of topics, general listening sessions, as well as some specific ones on training for LGBTI health researchers, as well as trans health issues. We've issued a public request for information, which we're now analyzing the results of, that was intended to better inform us as to what needs to be some of our priorities and our focuses. And then our biggest project to date, the development of an LGBTI health research strategic plan. So we are working on that now. So if you see me or other members of the RCC later this year and we all have gray hair and we look a little sketchy, that's why. And one big piece of what we've been doing is to maintain the channels of communication that we establish. It's really important that we make sure we're talking to people as we're going forward, but that we don't stop talking to them as we're pushing forward. We want to make sure that those channels are maintained and enhance them as much as we can. So we've been working with Albert Smith. Can we give Albert a round of applause real quick, please? As most of you know, but I'll say it for folks who might not, he is our NIH LGBTI portfolio strategist in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we've been working to try to synergize efforts and share information to make sure that our efforts are optimized as much as possible, which is how I got lucky enough to be here today to represent the immediate office of the director, and to get to introduce Racine Pendarvis. So about Racine Pendarvis. Racine was hailed by Washington Metro's Weekly as one of a kind, and is a native Washingtonian and a longtime progressive activist for LGBT liberation. He's host of Ask Racine, which is a live monthly show that focuses on LGBT issues, and serves as a writer-columnist for Swerve Magazine. So Swerve Magazine is the national lifestyle magazine periodical that celebrates culture and community of African-American LGBT folks throughout the country. A celebrate MC, Racine is a former host of Capital City, Black Pride, Winter Meltdown, and Songmaster's annual LGBT cruise, and a convener of the LGBT Book and Movie Club Bruz at the Martin Luther King Jr. Library. Among his many talents, Racine has also appeared in several print, television, and theater productions and has worked closely with Grammy Award winners Patti LaBelle, Shaka Khan, and Jennifer Holliday. I'm sorry, I'm so excited about that. I can't even pretend. So without any further ado, please come forward and bring some things. Racine Pendarvis.
On this day, I am very honored and very moved. I am first and foremost, my heart is so full because to be in this space, to be in this time, to be in this room, as we gather here at NIH to discuss issues surrounding transgender well-being and health. I am reminded of those trans people who now we stand on their shoulders. They are now part of our ancestors, those who stood at a time when they could not be. But yet, in the midst of ignorance, hate, and violence, they chose to be just that, in the essence, in the moment of being human. I am reminded of those who are in prison. I'm reminded of those who are in prison in their minds, whose bodies can no longer do or can no longer be what they would allow them to be. I am reminded of those who are voiceless. But today, as we begin a dialogue, we begin to honor those voices. We are the voices for them today. As we educate, enlighten, move, and take you through a journey of understanding. But before I begin, I'd like to give them a moment of silence for those who are no longer with us. Now let us change the energy in the room. Let us breathe in the positive energy. Let us exhale the negative energy. Let us be open to spirit and enlightened today. I am extremely honored to have joined with us today 4 amazing individuals whose academic and professional work directly impacts the lesbian, gay, bisexual community in general, and the trans community in particular. As we begin to go down, for those who do not know who they will raise their hand to acknowledge as they were in school to let you know as I announced them. Dr. Scott, who currently serves as the director of the Network for LGBT Health Equity at Centerlink and the adjunct assistant clinical professor at Boston University School of Public Health. Scott is a frequent public speaker, cultural communicator, trainer who specializes in tobacco, wellness, transgendered health, social determinants, health disparities, and surveillance. He leads a team that provides a variety of technical assistance for state and federal health stakeholders and work to link the local LGBT advocates to each other. Let us receive Dr. Scott. Following that is Ruby Carrero, the executive director of Casa Ruby in Washington, D.C. Casa Ruby is the only bilingual, please forgive me, I just want to make sure I am correct, the only bilingual, multicultural LGBT organization in the city of Washington, D.C. that provides life-saving services and provides to trans individuals. The organization's mission is to create successful life stories among transgender, queer, genderqueer, and queer non-conforming lesbians, gay, and bisexual people. Ruby has been recognized in the New Newsweek magazine, the Washington Post, the Washington Blade, the Metro Weekly magazine, the Washington City Paper, the Washington Times, the Advocate magazine, the NBC Latino, Univision, DC, CBS Radio, Pacific Radio, National Public Radio, and many other media channels for their tireless efforts in advancing and promoting equal rights for fair treatments of trans individuals. Miss Ruby Carrero. You have done so much, I almost wanted to add Tony, Oscar, and the award-winning, and the Grammy goes to. Who knows? We could claim that. Our next individual is Sasha Burkhardt from the Transgender Law Center in Oakland, California. Sasha is a longtime trans advocate who works focused on transgender and gender non-conforming persons with legal challenges. An attorney by training, Sasha represents or recently joined the TLC from Basic Rights Oregon, where she served as the state's LGBT communication manager. She has worked on ranges of transgender policy issues throughout the state of Oregon and has provided volunteer services to the Oregon State Hospital, where she's the chair and the advisory board, the LGBT Bar Association as well as many others. Let us receive Sasha Burkhardt. Dr. JV, I'm gonna get it right. I have been grappling with that name for quite some time, but I just want to make sure I'm correct. Sapanosa. Ha! A public education works. Dr. JV Sapanosa. JV currently serves as the Assistant Director of the LGBT Studies Program at the University of Maryland, College Park. A scholar in the field of women's study, JV's research interest examines radicalized lesbian, gay, trans, and queer subjectivities and representations. His scholarly research contributes greatly to the discoveries that examine the intersections of sex and sexual identity among people or persons of Asian and Pacific Island descent. Ladies and gentlemen, these are our panelists through today's journey as we begin to dialogue. But let me make this very clear. These are a few of our house rules. Please note, turn off all cell phones or all forms of electronic devices. For those who like to tweet, we are on Twitter today. Please follow us because we are tweeting live. You can follow us at NIH_EDI or on Instagram at NIH_EDI or on YouTube, EDIS Standard. We are tweeting live. And ladies and gentlemen, you can also follow me at @AsRacine on Twitter. And please let me know how much you've enjoyed this wonderful day. And if you did not, please do not follow me on Twitter. Our first question to our panelists today, and this is to all of you. What does LGBT pride mean to you? In no particular order.
Okay. I guess this is right. Hello, everyone. I always like to make a disclaimer because, I tend to be very intense. I've been doing this work for a little bit over 20 years. So sometimes I feel like the voices of those who are not here take over me. So I just want to say that, if I say things, they're not meant to target anyone. They're just the voice of desperation sometimes. Now, LGBT pride means so much because when I was growing up and when I was 5 years old, I knew I was different because my dad will basically try his best to change me. And I grew up when I was 18 years old. Actually, when I was 16, I landed in Silver Spring, Maryland by myself. I had fled El Salvador, a civil war. And I saw the word gay, and I saw the gay paper. And so I thought that I was gay. But some people used to tell me, well, you're a little super gay. So I always thought I was a little more gay than most gay people. So I know. So I started attending the festival celebrations. And for a long time, when I became transgender, even within my own community, I felt that I couldn't be me. But there was a point in my life where I had to make a life transition. And when I did, I knew I was part of the community, even though lots of people will say, oh, trans people don't belong in the LGBT movement. I was like, well, I'm here, We're still vomiting together out of the club sometimes when we leave at 3 a.m. So I must be part of it, even if you don't acknowledge me. But I realized that because I was proud of who I was as a person, as a human being, and I was so proud that I took my first hormone shot in 1995, that it was just me. And I think that is how I live my life today, being proud of being me. The fact that I am a member of this community not make some people proud, but it makes me proud.
All right. I think LGBT pride really means reminding ourselves, all of us, that there are many of us who are living in this country without civil rights, and that we get a series of things that happen to us on sometimes a daily basis that teach us that we're not yet equal citizens in this country. And so this is a time for us to remember and honor, and maybe for a few days live in a wonderful imaginary world where being LGBT is perhaps the routine instead of the exception. I do a lot of training around the country, and in most of the places where I go to train, it's perfectly legal to kick me out of the place where I am, and I would have absolutely no recourse whatsoever. When I was applying for PhD programs, one of the PhD programs from a prominent university said they were not letting me in because I was trans, and I couldn't believe that they were telling me that overtly, but the truth was it was fully accepted and it was perfectly legal. I had absolutely nothing that I could say except, well, I'm glad you didn't let me in because I actually don't want to go here then. I'm glad you said it. So there's too much we're carrying on a daily basis that we hear as the messages that we are not yet equal. So for me, LGBT Pride is that time to remind ourselves and the allies that maybe there's a world and a place and a time where this will be perfectly well accepted, and we will not be the exceptions or the targets of derision as we too frequently are today.
It's interesting. I've never been asked that question before, and I think that for me, I guess what it means is that I have come to a place in my life where, I've overcome the messages that I've received from society and overcome my own inner transphobia to really be proud of who I am and stand up for, our community. And also, as has been mentioned a couple of times, to remember the folks that were standing on the shoulders of people that have done this work for many, many years and to honor them. And also to think about the future, because we're not the last trans people that are and gender nonconforming people that are going to come through here, but to remember the responsibility that we have to move and shift public policy and improve things a little better for new folks.
I think I'll just add a little bit to what Sasha said in terms of LGBT pride being, to me, about responsibility and privilege. I feel very, very privileged to be able to be here at NIH, to be on a panel. It's wonderful to be part of this event, kicking off LGBT Pride at NIH, and from what I understand, a year-long series of events. And I think not only about those who are no longer with us or who are or who don't have the voices, and then I think about my own abilities to speak. And so for me, LGBT Pride is about not just taking the space and insisting on the space that we deserve because of basic equality, but also the responsibility, the accountability, and the privilege it is to speak.
Thank you all. My first set of questions will go to Sasha and Scott. Sasha, could you speak to us about the current workplace statistics pertaining to trans men and trans women and the general treatment and experience of those individuals in the workplace, as well as speak to some of the triggers and barriers that prevent them from thriving and flourishing professionally?
Sure, thanks. Can people hear me? Am I okay? Awesome. So I don't have a lot of statistics. I didn't come prepared with those, but I can tell you that trans people. There was a study done, the National Transgender Discrimination Survey, that was done 3 or 4 years ago now, by the task force that was mentioned earlier from Shane, that surveyed just under 6,500 people, and one of the findings that came out of that was that trans and gender nonconforming people have double the rate of unemployment. And so, yeah, discrimination is a huge, huge issue for our community for a number of reasons. One big one is identity documents. People don't have access to identity documents often because of the barriers that are in place that prevent people from getting the right gender marker on their ID so that they can go find employment. And then just flat out employment discrimination. We're working really hard to pass an Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but it's stalled out almost every year. So there's I think there's 33 states now that don't have protections for gender identity and just 17 that do. And even with those that do, as an attorney, I can tell you we talk to clients every day who, believe they've been discriminated against, but proving an employment discrimination case can be extremely difficult, especially if you're talking, about the hiring process. You don't know, and it's really hard there's never a smoking gun, or rarely a smoking gun, that shows that, this person obviously discriminated against us. So, the work that we do is to help, move policy forward through, passing laws in those states that don't have protections, and then doing impact litigation, especially for those states that don't have protections. And we work with a neat program in San Francisco that's called the Transgender Empowerment Employment Initiative, which helps work with trans clients to help them become job ready and it gives them steps to, put themselves in the best position that they can to be able to get employment. Other issues that come up often for trans employees that have already been hired, oftentimes people will, get a job and then decide they want to transition on the job, and that's usually what's recommended because of the hiring discrimination. And oftentimes, employers will find other, what they consider discriminatory reasons to terminate somebody or not give them a promotion because of their trans identity, or they don't have a policy in place that kind of walks through, how an employee should, what steps that an employer should go through to help shepherd a transitioning employee through the process, so things break down at that level. And just I don't want to forget, but if anybody's interested, on our website at transgenderlawcenter.org, we have a ton of resources that walk folks through. We have a model employer policy and a lot of employment discrimination information. There's been a lot of recent really welcome case law, the most significant of which we worked on recently, that was called Macy v. Holder, involving a trans woman who had applied for a position with the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms before she transitioned and was hired. And then she submitted her information and informed them that she would be transitioning, and suddenly the job disappeared. And she filed a claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is, where folks go usually when they file a discrimination claim. And it was initially dismissed because gender identity isn't sex discrimination under federal law, according to the EEOC. But there's significant case law, and I don't want to bore people with this, but that has shifted the definition of sex discrimination to include gender identity discrimination. So it was the case was appealed to the EEOC's agency's top agency court, and they ended up deciding that they would interpret, consistent with other federal law, that sex discrimination law included gender identity discrimination. So that was a huge step forward for those folks in some of those states without non-discrimination protections. So that's really windy, sorry.
That's okay. That is more than okay. It is good to have passion, and it's good to be passionate about what you're speaking to. And to those who have questions that we are following us on Twitter, and those in the audience, we ask that when the time allows us to open up to the floor, that you please follow my lead, because I will raise my hand to let you know that you're going too long. So Please follow that. And just going into our next question to Scout. Could you offer suggestions on how to create a more trans-inclusive workplace? And what are a few promising practices within the biomedical research and health services spaces that may assist NIH in their efforts?
I'd be happy to. The first thing you want to do if you're trying to create a trans inclusive workplace is have management actually indicate trans inclusion. And we're going to talk about maybe NIH as an example right now. It's excellent that NIH has someone who's an LGBT leader appointed in the office of the deputy director with Rashada, wherever she wandered off to. That is exactly one of the types of steps that is a best practice. You need it from the top down. It is also good that HHS has made LGBT employment non-discrimination across the board, and that they're even looking at possibly doing that with contractors, grantees, things like that. That would be wonderful if that moves forward. But you also have to integrate it into your actual program activities. And so we're going to keep using NIH as an example there. So far in the last approximately 25 years, we did a recent analysis, and it looks like of your external funding, 14 studies in maybe probably 22 years in that case have actually focused on the trans population, and even those were usually bundled with other populations as well. So while you do have leadership happening inside from on high, getting it down to the level where people are doing the work is still a challenge. So if you think about, keep using our example with NIH, an excellent step would be, as a researcher who's gotten our dreaded pink slips for some of my proposals, things like that, we need to do a better job of training the peer reviewers in this case. Not only giving them leadership and direction on it, but training them. A way to give them leadership and direction would be to make sure that LGBT is mentioned in the RFAs and the program announcements, things like that. If we don't see ourselves mentioned there, we do not know that it's safe. And if you haven't gotten anything, you'd understand there's not a history of safety. So we actually need some demonstration of safety. That's usually seen in the language. Because while, Larry's office and Dr. Collins' office and everything like that may be very welcoming, it doesn't mean the peer reviewers know that it's okay to support a trans-specific proposal under that funding announcement unless they're given some direction. And even then, it doesn't mean they actually have any kind of training or experience in this. So culture comms training or for your peer reviewers, I think would be an excellent step that NIH could take. Because right now, I'll tell you the common thing that happens is you get roughly 2 peer reviewers who are similar, and then one who's wildly off the map and usually says it's not at all valuable, it's already been done or something like that, and shows you that they don't know the arena. So we're clearly seeing the lack of knowledge in the peer reviewers as they review the proposals. And if you know, all you need is one to go down and there's no way you're going to get funded. So those are several steps that you can take here. You've got the leadership in place. Now you need to do more work at the actual rank and file level of who is doing the reviews, who's doing the policy making, the decision making, to make sure that your portfolios also echo this inclusion. Right now, the internal research portfolio has no LGBT studies whatsoever in it. So while I love to see all this work happening at NIH, I also think to myself, you've got to put your money where your mouth is before things will actually change and it'll be more welcoming and inclusive to people here.
Thank you. My next question will be to Scott and JV. It's a 2-part question. Transgender people experience at the group level one of the highest rates of violent murders within the United States. How might trans activists and advocates engage in the discussion around trans health and well-being with other minoritized populations with similar acts of violence that impact their lifestyles?
One of the things I think that is important to bring up is, and to overcome our assumptions about the affiliations and the unity that we have within and amongst groups, but also our assumptions about oppositions and which groups are, and that we imagine to be antithetically opposed to one another, right? I mean, even in the way that this question was framed, how do we get trans groups and activists to engage with other minoritized populations? Almost in a sense, erases the fact that there are trans folks of color, and that there are intersections among those groups. That yes, at sometimes these groups are distinct, and that they need, and when that is the case, that there needs to be conversation about commonalities, around shared goals, so that we can build coalitions around those things. But at the other times, you know, there needs to be understanding of differences, and how working in coalition doesn't mean we have to erase our unique aspects or our individuality, right? But I also think that if we do the work to challenge that image and that lack of recognition of intersectionality, that would go a long way. You know, it would also help if we imagine, you know, there's that image of, well, there's a pie and we need to fight for the slice of the pie, and we need to fight with one another over this limited pie. And certainly we have limited resources, whether we're talking funding or whatnot. But at the same time, I think that leads to horizontal hostility, to fighting in between communities, instead of fostering how we can work together. So really more discussion about what our assumptions are about who these communities are, more recognition of the ways that they do and already and have been together as one in the past, and that we can continue that as well in the future.
And I'll absolutely echo everything you said. Very true. The intersections between the communities, I think, is a place of incredible power, opportunity, and yet some place that we often do let slide by and forget exists. I'm going to give you an example of one way that people have done these kind of discussions, actually in another federal environment, and that's where I work under. I'm currently funded by CDC as a health disparity network for LGBT folks, focusing on tobacco, chronic diseases, and cancer. And the Network for LGBT Health Equity is funded as one of, I think it might be now 8 sister networks, funded primarily by OSH, Office of Smoking and Health, and then the Cancer Office at CDC. And the other health disparity networks cover Asian American Pacific Islanders, Black African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans. And so what we end up doing is, since we're a series of sister networks working with each other, we are usually the resource to their grantees. So basically, we spend a lot of our time being the people who tell their grantees, here's some actions you can take, here's some best practices you can take, things like that. But we also spend a lot of our time working with each other to find collaborative space where we can actually advocate together. Because of course, we're all much stronger together than we are apart. And so that's been an interesting experience where we not only plumb how we each have our own biases, we're all, you know, raised in similar environments that include a lot of discrimination, and we internalize a lot of it wherever we start. We have to do, I think, a lot of bridge building between the different populations and the leadership in different populations. You know, just because someone might be an Asian American Pacific Islander leader doesn't mean they have any experience of trans. It doesn't mean I have any experience of Pacific Island leadership, things like that. So we do have to do a lot of work on building those connections, but it ends up being a really interesting and powerful dynamic. Like, for example, we come to NIH, and, you know, we gave you guys a letter a few years ago talking about the granularity of data collection and making sure that it was being addressed for lots of populations, not just LGBT, not just any of the overlapping racial and ethnic minority populations, but for all of us together. So that was, I think, a really successful model on how to do this kind of collaborative work, and therefore advance all of our issues, especially one of the hardest ones that we have to deal with, the level of violence. It means that when I'm not in the room, you know, the head of the African American network stands up and talks about LGB and T issues, including violence. And that's because we've done this work with each other to train each other. And one very specific thing that I think would be able to help at NIH's level is that you have an incredible catbird seat on one issue related to all of HHS, which could really change the level of interaction that happens on these things across HHS. And that's that you have the decision-making power in this agency to decide whether LGBT is a health disparity population or not, legally designated, which would cross all of HHS. And I've got to be honest, currently NIH has not yet said that we're a health disparity population. And that leaves us a little bit homeless, kind of, in a lot of different places, because there's offices that focus on racial ethnic minorities, offices that focus on women. Obviously, many of us are those things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that LGBT writ large can find a home in one of those places.
Thank you, Dr. Scout. The second question, which almost you guys touched on, but if you feel the need, here it is. How might these communities forge a more coherent national perspective around inclusion and social justice?
I mean, I'll say briefly, this is a great question, but it's not only about how can communities do this, but really, what are the communities that are already doing this, right? It's not as if folks aren't on the ground doing this work and that there isn't a history and a precedent for it. You know, some of the places that we've already discussed, not only the organizations that we represent, there's been mention of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. Here in the area, there's the National Black Justice Coalition, right? The National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. So there are many existing groups that are doing this work, right? So on one hand, I want to say, well, stop asking out how, and instead inform yourselves and work to inform yourselves and share with others the groups that are already doing this work, right? The other thing I would say is, you know, when it comes to national issues and working at a national level, there is certainly power in that. And yet my fear is that in working for that unified national goal and message and agenda, that it leaves little room, or that it may leave little room for variations and for complexity and for flexibility. And so then we start to have a narrowing of scope, a narrowing of an understanding of what it means to be trans, or what trans wellness or trans health might be. And so I would also say, yes, working for more coherent national perspectives is certainly a key goal, but I hope one that's not overshadowed by a space for complexity and diversity, so that some of those nuances can still come through as well.
And I just like to actually flip it a little bit and say, how can we work more on a local agenda? Because each of us up here is doing, you know, national agenda work and local agenda work kind of day and night with our lives. But I think the real power in this is all of the you out there and all the people watching, particularly the allies, because the question really that I want to know is, what are you doing on a daily basis to change the local agenda in wherever you have the influence or power? Because that is really going to be what we need in order to create any kind of a sea change. We can work on a national agenda till we get blue in the face, but it's these local changes which really create the power. So what are you doing is really the question.
Thank you. Our next question will be posed to JV and Ruby. During the 1990s, the focus on many academic teaching and researching in gender and sexual studies focused narrowly on topics related to HIV and AIDS. From a public health perspective, among the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, trans people are at the highest risk for infection due to the influence of issues that ranges from poverty, social stigma, unemployment, discrimination, sex work, and education, to the lack of access to medical information and health care. Tell us if there are any academic institutions engaged in more community-based, particularly efforts supporting institutions like Casa Ruby in programming and education are some of our examples. Please.
Well, thank you. I think that is really important. I want to begin by saying that as a person who has been living with the HIV virus, a lot of my health has really been covered through HIV. That has left everything else about my health really unattended. I am basically, my body is polluted. It's been polluted since 1995, when the only source that I have to transition medicine was the black market hormones that I had to buy on the internet or on the street that were supposedly to come from Mexico. The 5 liters of silicone that is not supposed to be in my body, it's supposed to be on cars and vehicles and machines, that is currently, deteriorating after almost 20 years. It is a crisis, and the crisis is not being addressed. I do believe that we are beginning a conversation, and through academia, a lot of people who are in the social justice movement are doing amazing work. And I say that because about 15 years ago, I started being on panels talking about violence and how we were experiencing a lot of violence. That still continues. But I do believe that there are other institutions, for example, in Washington, D.C., in conjunction with the DC Trans Coalition, in the Williams Institute, American University, and GW, we completed a study, which is a really comprehensive study for a large metropolitan area. And some of the findings are going to be published pretty soon. Although I really knew that there were disparities, some of them really shocked me. Like the unemployment rate in our city is very proud that the unemployment rate sometimes hits low 8%, but for trans populations in Washington, D.C., it is 50%. And of those who are employed, 50% make less than $15,000 a year. If you look at this room, half of this room will be unemployed and the other one will be living in poverty. That's a challenge. That's a challenge because these are the people that, although a lot of research is not being done, eventually it will be done. And how are you going to get to us if we can even afford the MetroCard sometimes? I do believe that some of the great change that can happen is I approached the Georgetown Law Community Justice Project because as a transgender organization, we operate at an LGBT center, and we do have a lot of small programs that are not funded yet, but are really creating an amazing change. And they were very welcoming of us. They helped us with supporting of our infrastructure, and they helped us create our strategic plan. And they also did an independent study that it showcased that our agency is the right agency in terms of cultural competency, because we do come from the community. We are a grassroots agency. And like Georgetown Law, I haven't seen a lot of medical institutions. I do know that GW has an LGBT program. And the first time I heard of them was when the director actually wrote to me because he was going to Health and Human Services and he wanted my input on, you know, how I look transgender health within HHS. But I feel hopeful. I mean, certainly being here today, it's a beginning. There's definitely most of the research that I am aware of on trans people that at least have been in research, it's been through HIV. And as many of us continue to live with the disease, there are other things. And silicon is one of the biggest problems that I see for us.
Ruby's mentioned a few of the local universities. I'll just give props to, you know, the question was about academic institutions engaged in community-based work. And I've seen at the University of Maryland, I'm on the flagship campus at College Park, more and more of a push towards service learning, especially for undergraduate students, to get students out into the community, out into organizations, to do things like internships, to gain experience, but also to learn from those things, right? So there's a lot of movement, I think, not only at the University of Maryland, but universities nationwide to push to offer and increase those opportunities for students. On one hand, that's great. I think it's a valuable experience that students often do feel are very enriching. On the other hand, I also worry, well, you know, if a student is doing this for X amount of hours for a semester, what kind of really sustainable help is that providing to organizations like Casa Ruby, like the DC Trans Coalition? You know, I have had students who've maintained their contact after their internship, working to volunteer, which I think is great. But I also think that there is a model for internships that's not necessarily ideal, either for students or for organizations, right? But with that said, there is a lot of work going on in universities. Locally here, George Washington University just launched their LGBT Health Graduate Certificate Program. Right? They did this in response to the report on health of LGBT people by the Institute of Medicine, as well as in response to the inclusion of LGBT people as a population of focus in Healthy People 2020, right? So that's working right here in our neighborhood. And what they're doing at George Washington is really trying to focus on not just conducting research, but on educating providers, right? Because we're talking about what are the different levels we have to work at. Yes, we need the policies at the higher level. We need the leadership, but we also need ways in which folks on the ground are more trained. I mean, one of the discussions I have with my students is about LGBT education in elementary schools. And we have a debate about whether or not we should include such curriculum. And overwhelmingly, they argue themselves and get to a point where they say, yes, we should certainly introduce these topics, you know, and that more education earlier would help and just transform things on a larger scale. And then I say, okay, that's great. And what kind of training do you think your teachers have received? And what kind of training do you think counselors have received? Was it a day of a class, a semester, you know, in a semester-long class? So part of it is not just about education solving all ills, which I hear a lot on a university campus, but really about how to make systematic and institutionalized change at every level, not only getting people to see the value of that education, that knowledge and understanding, but making it so that folks are trained and culturally competent and can offer these things. I don't think anybody in this room would say, oh yeah, I don't need to know anymore. I'm good. I know enough, right? But the problem is, well, how do we keep learning? And it is an ongoing process. And, you know, sometimes my students are like, well, just tell me what the right answer is. And they get so frustrated when I say, well, it depends. And they're like, but no, just tell me what it is so I'll know it, whether it's about language or other issues. You know, the problem really isn't about the lack of knowledge, but about using that knowledge critically and working and leaving enough space to let it develop and change. I mean, we've seen that not only in our laws, but in how people use and identify as transgender and the varying definitions of transgender, of genderqueer, or gender nonconforming, and all the other labels and language that, you know, have come and gone and the ones that are still to come.
Thank you. So I think hold on. I think I'm going to swing it right back over to you. The next question, you guys answered. Your passion allowed you to go right into the next question. So if you'd like to finish up with just a few more words, Ruby, you're more than welcome.
It's quite interesting. I've been doing transgender advocacy for a long time. And I do know that people who watch the news or read the paper have seen me at some point or another, especially in this area, because there's just been so much violence, so many killings. And I'm usually pretty open whenever I have the opportunity to get to speak. I don't just talk about what is killing us, but I really talk about what could potentially kill us in the future. We have a movement in Washington, D.C., but I very often don't see the people that are working on research actually reaching out to us. I am a founding member of the DC Trans Coalition, and for many years we worked so much on policy and we did amazing work, including this survey that is coming out. And now at Casa Ruby, we opened the doors for 2 years, which is celebrate our 2nd year anniversary, and I have yet to see anyone from the research institutions to actually walk in the door and just say, hey, I just wanted to stop by and see what this place is all about. And I know we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook like crazy, we've been on every media outlet that you can name. So it does make me wonder. You know, I'm not here to criticize what is not being done, but I think it is important. Sometimes I do wonder, is it because we are a mostly people of color organization? Is it the fact that, you know, we speak another language sometimes for clients who come in? Is it the fact that we are the voice of desperation and sometimes when we speak, people don't want to listen? Because when you listen and you pay attention, just like, you know, a lot of the ads says, if you see something, say something. And when you say something, you must act. So I just wanted to leave that with you because it is okay. It is okay to, send an email to a trans group or transgender organization and just say, hey, I know that you exist and we support your work.
Thank you. I'm going to go into my next set of questions, which are almost the last segment. But before I go into that segment, I'm going to share a story that I had a conversation with a doctor in Washington, D.C. at a hospital. And it let me know that we still have work to do. When the doctor told me before she arrived in the ER, the patient had waited 4 hours that was being transferred from one hospital to another. When the patient arrived, she had partial information that said trans, but had not had the complete surgery. So the attendants, when they saw the paperwork and saw the physical did not match, there was a problem. So here lies where we have problems. The problem was she was HIV positive, double amputee, needed to be admitted into a hospital, being transferred. The paperwork did not match what was going on, what they saw physically. So someone took the initiative to say we could not place this person in a room as the only room available is with another male. So they were going to place her in a room with another male, which was a problem. When the attendant noticed when she arrived, something was not right, she contacted the doctor and said, we have a problem. When the doctor arrived, she immediately went into mode of, let me try to diffuse what is going on. The patient was already in a state of, here I am, at a point where I am physically not what you view me, where I am mentally, but yet you're going to deny me treatment because you cannot understand what is going on. So I'm going to say this question, and I'm going to pose it to JV and Scout. I want to talk to you about trans subjectivity against the backdrop of New York State recent decision to no longer require proof of sex change surgery for trans people to change birth certificates. Tell me how this policy change impacts health access and the well-being of those trans persons in New York State.
Or just New York State?
It just said, well, my question, well, we can elaborate.
Okay.
We can expand.
Exactly. You know something, it's interesting because if many of you aren't trans, I suspect some of you probably aren't trans, you kind of don't understand some of the daily issues that some of us go through. Like, for example, in my home state, they had a similar policy to that they would not change my birth certificate without surgery. And then actually at the same time, I was attempting to get a divorce, but same-sex divorce was not allowed in my state. So it was interesting. They told me I should get a sex change in order to have my divorce. But then I couldn't get my documents changed unless I had surgery. And I really did kind of draw the line at having surgery in order to have a divorce. But what it ended up meaning, and this was not too long ago. This was very recently, as a matter of fact. I was able to get my documents changed, which made a lot of sense in my state, for my driver's license and things like that. Since I couldn't get it changed on my birth certificate, it meant I couldn't get my passport changed. So my driver's license and my passport never matched each other, as a matter of fact. And at that point, I contacted the national organizations when they required that you put down the additional information under Homeland Security, including your gender. They required that you put it down for flights to go leaving the country, right? So I contacted the national organizations and said, what do we think our options are here? Because now I'm going to put down information that doesn't match some of my documents in order to leave the country. And again, this was just a few years ago. And literally what came back from several national trans legal advisors was, don't leave the country. We think you can leave, but we're not sure you can get back in. So this is just one example of the types of incredible hassles that people go through on a daily basis if their documents do not match each other. And if, just another thing to note is, remember, surgery is something that is for richer people. Poorer people do not have the option to save up what for trans women could easily be $100,000 for the surgeries needed in order to pass. So that's not just a bar that has to do with complication and lines and everything like that. That also has to do with financial qualifications. And so we don't ever want to put those kind of hurdles in front of people. I will give kind of shout outs to my local Department of Motor Vehicles, because the way I got my documents changed at my local Department of Motor Vehicles was they stared at it for a long time because they were going to give me a motorcycle license. They're going to put an M on my license so I could drive a motorcycle. And eventually they realized that I had F as far as my sex. And they brought me up there and they said, we just saw this, what's going on? And I'm like, well, I'm trans. And they thought about it, sent me to sit down, then brought me back up again. They're like, okay, we understand you're trans, totally fine. But you're not really a woman yet, are you? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, they wanted me to like grow my hair, wear a blouse, or at least try a little bit. But they're like, until you just try a little bit, honey, I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to put an M on your license. I'm like, you know something, that's fine. I totally understand. As soon as I get a little more committed to the issue, I'll be back for the F. But for now, that sounds good. So, this is the kind of complications that go on just a really, really regular basis. And until you live with that kind of noise in your life, it may seem like a small change to you, but it's huge for us.
Thank you. Thank you. JV, would you like to?
I'll just say really quickly, this is an interesting conversation, question. On one hand, as someone who identifies as trans and goes by male pronouns, but hasn't elected for any surgery or hormone treatment, I don't have any conflict in my identity documents in the sense that they're all in the same way of how I don't identify, right? And so, I don't know if you're all coming from campus, so one of the things I had to do this morning was check in and get a badge and present my license, which I'll have to tell you, it's like, okay, I know I'm expected. I passed by a poster that had my face on it. I have Albert's phone number. I'm going to be okay. But that experience of having to present my license, and I hope you don't look at it, but my badge having my legal name on it is really, it's one of those things that I'm glad I'm at the place mentally and emotionally where I can handle that. But at the same time, I hate it. And I really wanted to take my pen and just scratch that out and write my preferred name. But then I thought, I don't want to do that until I leave, because who knows who will stop me. And it's that fear of, coming onto campus and, instructions I got about passing security and it was that moment of, oh my gosh, am I going to be okay? That I had to think about, that I don't know if anybody else thought about. But as we were taking the shuttle, I noticed people had their IDs in their pockets and, here and there. And I was like, oh, I'll just put that down there and maybe no one will notice it. And I'll just have my hand over it and it won't be a big deal. But not only that does that work in terms of my visit to campus, but, this New York State law change, which DC also does, says that, hey, we're going to give you access to identity documents that accurately reflect who you are and who you think you are and who you say you are and how you present yourself, without mandating surgery. You still are mandated some kind of clinical, doctor signs off, but who the doctor that signs off on and what they have to sign off in has changed, which I think is great. On the other hand, as a foreign-born immigrant, even though I'm naturalized as a citizen, it doesn't help that DC will change a birth certificate or New York will change a birth certificate. I have a birth certificate from a different country, which I won't change. Partly because I'm too paranoid about my citizenship status, because I know too well, histories of Japanese internment, and it's like, and the fact that they were citizens, that I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to keep everything the way my INS documents had it, right? Back when it was still the INS.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to open up the floor to any questions on Twitter. Okay, so how about the floor? Yes, young man. Please stand so we could hear you.
Hi, so this question is open to one thing that I'm really interested in is the importance of transparency. So can you speak to the importance of that, versus what kind of resources are needed, what kind of sensitivity?
I'd like to speak on our local data that we received. People talk about half. Like usually, it seems that when they talk about national averages, they usually, for some reason, DC it triples or it quadruples. Our recent study showed that 89% of people that were harassed, sexually abused, or traumatized, or have been victims of a hate crime had actually attempted suicide. 89%. That's a lot of people, and I was one of them. In 2008, I was left for death. This person decided that I needed to be cleansed, and he shot me, he left me, he raped me. What I do remember is that I woke up in an emergency room, and the nightmares began. And it took me a while because although the best thing for me to do was to go to crisis therapist and a person who deals with rape, I couldn't tell her I was transgender because she kept focusing on lots of things. And I think she helped me a lot because there were times I wanted to run in front of buses because the voices in my head were just telling me, you're too dirty. And she did help me on that. But there were times when I wondered what would have happened if I had told her that I was trans. And that is the story for many of us. And as many of you are here, I want you to understand that there is a crisis. The national report on trans disparities is called Injustice at Every Turn. And when I actually think about that, everywhere I turn, do I want to go to the doctor? I have issues. Do I want to go and find a job? I have huge issues. When I want to go to a hospital because something just happened to me, I'm not sure I will get what I need. When I look at the justice system, currently there are 24 trans women in DC jail, mostly convicted of survival sex work. And when they come out, even us, a transgender organization, we don't have much to give them. So I would love to see more resources because I think that is where we're heading. When you have a crisis, you have to deal with it. And certainly, thank you for bringing the mental health because 4 years later, I still have the nightmares. I still have to be careful, and I'm trying my best to stay strong because I'm one of the few that have survived, and I need to keep it going.
Yeah, I would just add to that, from that survey, the National Transgender Discrimination Survey that was mentioned by Dr. Scott earlier, that 41% of the folks that were surveyed had attempted suicide. And so it is a huge problem for our community. And one issue that we work on, and that's really important in moving that forward, is to remove exclusions in healthcare plans. Because currently a lot of healthcare plans will just deny mental health care counseling if it's related to gender dysphoria. So that's what's important for us.
Thank you for that question surrounding mental health and how we begin to deal with issues surrounding mental health and trans people. To the next young lady.
That actually ties up really well into my question. I was wondering, this is open to anyone, how you feel about gender dysphoria being classified in the DSM, because I know that it allows you to get treatment and help, but it's also classified as a mental disorder. So I was wondering how you feel about that.
Meh.
Could you repeat the question once more again?
How do you feel about gender dysphoria being classified in the DSM? My answer was MEH. I mean, we obviously need it for the way the current medical model is put together right now in some scenarios, but it still is, not pleasant to be thinking that you're in the DSM in the first place.
Yeah, there's different perspectives. I think it's dangerous territory to think of people with disabilities or with mental health care diagnoses and stigmatize them as that's not something we want to be, so, and it has helped a lot of people get medically necessary treatment, but the pathologization isn't necessary though either, in my opinion, because I feel like there are other models. I was just reading a paper recently that suggested thinking about preventive care or pregnancy care. It's something that you get treatment for, but you're not just given this ultimate diagnosis. And it's been done. Argentina removed for accessing healthcare in Argentina now. You don't have to have a gender dysphoria diagnosis, including gender reassignment surgery.
There's a question from Twitter.
And the question comes from a individual by the name of Barn Johnson. The question is if panelists could share any good resources that they've come into contact with, i.e. books, that have helped them through their transition process.
Did everyone hear that question?
We did.
Okay.
Do you hear the silence? Yeah.
Stone Butch Blues.
Stone Butch Blues is an excellent book. The young lady in the back. True Selves. Transgender Warriors. Redefining Realness. That's an excellent book. That's an excellent book.
I'll add in a few titles. Newly published is Trans Bodies, Trans Selves. There is, coming out of the University of Arizona, a new journal, the Trans Studies Quarterly. Yeah, TSW, Trans Studies Quarterly. New, just started their second volume. Max Wolf Valerio's Testosterone Files. Jameson Green's Unbecoming a Man. FTMs and Trans Men by Jason Cromwell. And I love young adult fiction, so things like Parrotfish by Ellen Whittinger. And there are several other young adult fiction titles featuring trans characters as well. So there's a variety of stuff out there. Some of the stuff that's focused more on surgery and after effects and what you can expect. Other things dealing more with history. There's Susan Stryker's Transgender History to give you a sense that you're not alone. You're not the first one. There is a community. And many, many other titles. I would say the Lambda Literary Awards were just announced for 2014, and they've had several different kinds of transgender categories. So if you're looking for reading material, that's one good place to start.
But actually, a little extra note on Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, just because that's about, was it 700 pages or something like that? And it just came out within the last month. So this is a historic new resource for our communities. And so I would encourage people who are not trans to look at that as a source of information on health issues.
And this really isn't answering the question directly, but I would recommend that anybody that were considering, transitioning, get involved with community. It's really important. It's been important in my life. And also, there's been an explosion in this work, among a lot of different organizations nationally. So the websites at Casa Ruby or Transgender Law Center or, Lambda Legal, there's a lot of information out there that wasn't out there just a couple of years ago. And that's especially important for people in rural parts of the country.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. But before I do that, it is so important that the young man who spoke to mental health, I'm going to tell you a story, if I may, on the brave warriors' parents, the amazing parents in our community who embrace their children no matter what, who love their children unconditionally. Too many times we hear stories about parents who don't understand, but we don't hear the stories of the amazing fathers and mothers and caregivers, aunts, uncles, grandparents, etc. But if I wait, I'm going to tell you one story. A woman I knew by the name of Pauletta Ford, actually, who had a transgender daughter that was known by Puffy. She took her daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, to the doctor. The doctor said, "Miss Ford, there is nothing wrong with your child. There's something wrong with you. If you can't understand this is who your child is going to be, I can't tell you anymore other than to go home and love your child." And I must say that they had the incredible relationship that was so unconditional and was so amazing. And those stories need to be told. They need to be embraced because there are parents who love these transgender children, and God bless them for the strength, for the love, for just the sensitivity to realize that these are their children who are human beings. This young man here, and then I'll go to you.
So I have a question, and this can really go for anybody. We've really talked about a wealth of different challenges, both psychosocial and health, that impact the transgender population. Are any of you working on, are there any existing, I guess you could say, interventions? Because in order to address all these challenges, it's going to have to be something holistic. So is there anything that any of you are working on? And if so, are you working on packaging that so other jurisdictions and places will be able to replicate what you're doing?
I'm working with a guy on a research project right now. He's got great preliminary data on being able to change provider attitudes towards treating trans people. Most providers say, here's a referral to someone else. And so with as little as an hour intervention grand rounds, he's really been able to change provider attitudes. So we're really looking to try and move that to something that's a larger platform and can be used by more people around the country.
The biggest project that I've been working on for years is called Casa Ruby, and I used to do HIV prevention. I started in 1995, but I decided to stop because the only thing that I had to offer my HIV positive clients, or the ones that we were trying to find out if they were zero positive, was condoms and me. And I realized that many of them, because they had to live in poverty, and regardless of color, race, they all were coming to me poor. And a lot of the times with, diseases or really a lot of mental health issues. So I decided that I was going to do something different, and I started my own thing. Our nonprofit, basically, our main goal, as based on our strategic plan, it's employment. But right now we're currently doing some health initiatives with the health department, and they're on my terms. Like I told them, I will give you the money back, because I do have an understanding of where we are and where we have been. And Michael tells me, Ruby, we are here to support anything that you do, because we know. I met with our grant monitor. We just received our first grant for treatment adherence. And I told them, you don't tell me how I have to do this work, because for the 17 years that I have been positive, I have also been undetectable. So I must know what I'm doing, and that is what I intend to do. I do think that holistic, it's a word that many of us don't understand. Holistic doesn't mean that you basically say, I understand. Holistic means, give me the resources, do your research. If you're in research, there are very few things out there, but there are some. There's lots of support groups. There's lots of social justice groups that are being very supportive of the trans movement. And there are transgender organizations. We're not the only one. But I do think that it begins with you. And you have a lot to offer. For example, the work of our agency is supported a lot by academia, because I don't know accounting. I'm not a lawyer, but we have all of those things that we need, because people do come and support our work.
Our final question from the floor from this young man.
This is kind of a complicated question, but I'll try my best. So I'm particularly interested in double minority status, and as a gay black person, being double minority in lots of places made my life harder, but in some reasons also made my life easier, because I find that a lot of people in the deaf and gay communities respectively have been actually more accepting of the fact that I am a double minority, because they themselves know what it's like to be minorities. So for those of you who happen to also identify as double minorities, being trans and being, part of another minority, I was wondering if you think that experience has made your overall experience easier or harder than it would be if you were maybe only a single minority.
So the question was speaking to double minority.
It's definitely made it harder. I was just featured on the Washington Post Mother's Day special, and she asked me, the reporter asked me, what is so different in what you're doing and how your mother was doing her work? And I said, my mother never had her identity question. My mother never had to deal with the fact that when I said in public that I was a transgender woman, I was devalued. and I was no longer seen as who I believe that I am in my heart and in my soul. As a director of an agency, we just started getting funded, and it took, a lot of work. Going to the main funders, even the ones that said that they were social justice driven, when we put proposals for work that it's incredibly needed, they said, oh, we don't focus on populations. We focus on issues. And even when they focus on issues, if you focus on an issue, you should definitely have funded me because we have the higher levels of unemployment. And I do agree, and thank you for mentioning, when they said, well, our experts that reviewed our, the RFAs said that, the proposal was not where, and I said, there are no experts. I am the expert. You want to talk to my experts, come to Casa Ruby on an afternoon, and then you will know. If you don't know, you can't expect, how can you deny me a transgender employment program proposal when the disparity is there? So I do think it is important to follow what you said, because if we do not have the economic tools and we continue to be economically marginalized, we will be contributing to the outcome that we have today.
I think it is a very complex question based on what are those different dimensions of identity that intersect. I will say that at times it's been harder, not only, and I'll push back a little bit because I don't always like the double minority. I'm not, or triple, or, if you think about my national origin status, quadruple. I'm not trying to add on and be like the king of oppressions and the king of minority, king of minority identities here. Because I want us to think more, I don't know what, complexly about the different identities we all inhabit and how we have privileges and how we experience oppression or discrimination in a variety of ways. In some ways, having these multiple identities that are oppressed has been a good thing because out of sheer need, out of sheer desperation, I've been able to find community. It's sort of a horrible way to find community, but at the same time, when you know that look of pain and suffering and you identify it and you're drawn to one another to try and create a safe space. So it's been both a good thing and a bad thing. But at the same time, I'd say, some of the most uncomfortable places I've been have been queer Asian American spaces because of the way in which I experience my gender identity in those spaces. And how that just adds another level of complication and the way in which I think, oh, well, this is a queer Asian space. I should feel at home. And so when I don't, then the problem isn't the space, it's me. And so, in some ways it's been difficult in that sense as well.
So here we are to the end. We are beginning to break barriers, tear down walls, and open up understanding. Today was a beginning, and we applaud NIH for this big step. We applaud our panelists for their honesty, their truth, and their enlightenment. But most of all, we applaud you for being here, being open, being in the know, and being in the understanding that there is work to be done around issues surrounding transgendered well-being and health. Let us not be the first day that this will just end here. Let this begin a series of conversation as we come back and as you allow me to come back and facilitate and open up this understanding of dialogue and the healing, the knowledge, and the knowing. Our final thought from a representative from NIH to close us out.
It really hasn't been my intention to do much of the talking, primarily because I know the importance of storytelling. And I am an African-American cisgender male, and that means that I'm not transgender. And I really was interested in presenting the voices of those who identified as transgender, and to take a seat in the back in that respect. Um, as I mentioned, a good friend of mine often reminds me that our stories matter. And I think that today's panel is certainly an example, a testament to that very saying. We all have stories, and so we should definitely make certain that they count. I struggled a bit in coming up with a parting gift for my friends here. They're my friends now. They're our friends now, right? And so I rushed off to the bookstore and I went down to the children's section because a part of me is a child and I still love being a child. And I went with the hope of getting Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You Will Go. And I started to converse with the young lady at the bookstore, and I shared with her the purpose. And she pointed me to a little book by a young lady called Hooray for You, a celebration of your uniqueness. Let me tell you guys, there's someone in the back right now. Jay in the back is just laughing. This book will change your life. I read it often now, and I find myself just excited because of the encouragement that it provides me as an individual who identifies as both queer and African American, of just how important it is to be me, to stand in my truth, and to be authentic. And I encourage each of us in all of our various intersecting identities to be you. We honor you. We honor you. And to go and to pick up this book because it's great. So, with that being said, we thank you for joining us today. Be reminded that we will have a trans sensitivity training scheduled for June 18th in the Clinical Center. And then June 26th, we will have with us one of the nation's first trans political appointees, Amanda Simpson, in conversation with us to share her story too. So thank you guys for coming and have a good afternoon. Hooray for you.